and I've been at other funerals where they've lasted for free. We have a thing that we call the moment of truth in a game. And the moment of truth in a game is when you have to make a critical call and you got to get it right. And if you get it wrong, it could change the whole course of the game. If you get it right, it could change the whole course of the game too. I've had a number of those moments of truth. In life, we also have many moments of truth when you have to make a call, and you need to make the right call, and you need to make the call by faith or by fear. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Some of you, when you're in those moments of truth, all you know sometimes is that you're in the pressure cooker. You know, you're boiling. You're like, it is so hot in here. It is so hard. I'm so frustrated. You're maybe lashing out at people. You're saying, why, God, why? Or stuff like that. And the pressure is around you, and you're looking for a way out of the pressure cooker. And sometimes when you jump out of the pressure cooker, well, into the fire, whatever, you make the wrong decision. Instead of making a decision based on faith, you make it based on fear. And you don't realize that this is a faith-defining moment. This is the moment of truth. It will change your game forever. And so you need to make those decisions, and you need to make them well. Life demands faith. So if we were to ask you what your story is, we would be here all day, and it would be really cool to hear what your stories, your life-defining stories are, because everyone has one, and we're all faced with crises, and we're all faced with all kinds of stuff. Let's look at 4 people who had life-defining moments. The first one is Abraham. Verse 17, we read those verses. Abraham, when he was testified, he offered up Isaac. And he would receive the promises, offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac shall your seed be called. So here was the man, Abraham, who made the ultimate sacrifice. Now, what a story was this? I can't even imagine being in Abraham's shoes. I can't even imagine that one day you're in the tent, and you're going, hey, Sarah, do the dishes, and Isaac, clean up your mess, and I got to take care of the servants outside, and, the camels were a little, and then all of a sudden, God shows up. Now, that's even more amazing. That's more amazing. But this ordinary day turned into an extraordinary day, and God was going to ask something hard to believe of Abraham. Abraham, yeah, I want you to sacrifice your only son. I want you to offer him as a sacrifice up on Mount Moriah. Who is this? It's the Lord. Huh? Would God ask me that kind of question? Would God ask me to sacrifice my only son, my son? If I had 4 or 5, would he ask me that question? This is just absolutely, absolutely crazy. And then you think about it. Abraham said, okay. What was wrong with that guy? I mean, really, what was wrong with him? Here's a very, very, very old man, probably 100 years old or older, probably older. And his son, nobody seems to really know how old Isaac was. Some suggest anywhere from 16 to 18 to 35, anywhere in that range. I kind of like to think he was at the young end of that range, but I don't really know because we're just not told. It was before Sarah died. There just isn't a real good chronology there. But you got this old man and this young strapping man, and the old frail man says, hey, son, I'm going to sacrifice you on the altar. And this young strapping boy looks at him and says, oh, yeah? You just go ahead and try it. That's not really what happened, though, is it? But he could have, right? The relationship that Abraham and Isaac had one with another had to be incredible, had to be amazing, because I can't imagine that happening to Colin. Not going to happen, huh, Colin? Maybe. Yeah. Your parents have threatened to kill you before, haven't they? Yeah, I knew it. I knew it. See, this is probably what was going on here. Wow. Just amazing. I just can't imagine. To me, there's so many things that could go wrong with this scenario that Abraham had to make the right life-defining choice. And even the right life-defining choice seemed wrong. Because here's the question that troubles so many people. How could a loving God even ask you or anyone to sacrifice, to kill your son or daughter? Doesn't that sound pagan to you? It doesn't sound like a loving God to me. What in the world is going on? Now, Genesis chapter 2, if you want to keep a finger in Hebrews 11, turn back to Genesis chapter 22. Genesis chapter 22, verse 1 explained what God was really doing. It says there in Genesis 22, verse 1, now it came to pass that God tested Abraham. That sounds kind of like an unfair test, doesn't it? I mean, I guess unless you're really put in the real pressure cooker, how will you know how you're going to turn out? This is a test. It was a moment of truth. It was a life-defining moment. And just what was God testing? When God tests you, when bad things happen to you, when trials happen, what is God, what's the point? You ever ask that? God, when are my finances ever going to clear up? What's the point? God, when am I going to get well? What's the point? You know, you have many things that you ask God. You don't, what are you doing, God? Why are you doing this? Well, look at Genesis chapter 22, verse 12. Here's what God was testing. And God said, do not lay your hand on the lad. This is after Abraham had already, he was ready to drive that knife home. Wow, I can't even conceive of it. Do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for I know that you fear God, since you've not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Wow. Crazy. Now, God didn't want Abraham to kill his son. And if you ever hear the voice from heaven that says, kill your kid, well, maybe you should do it. No, you shouldn't do it. Because, that's not what God does. He doesn't come to these crazy, deranged people and they say, I want you to go to McDonald's and shoot everyone up. No, that's not God. This was a test. God was not going to allow Abraham to go through with this test. This happened one time in the Bible and only one time, and it never happened again. So don't try this at home or on any other mountain that you might go to, like Mount Moriah. What God was doing was testing Abraham's loyalties. It turns out that all our crises are also a test of our faith and our loyalties, to see whether your faith will stand up under scrutiny. How will you as an individual ever know truly whether you will stand up under pressure unless you actually experience the pressure? I'm an athlete, but I never, I'm a distance runner. I run the 2-mile run or the 10-mile run or whatever it is, but I never really run it. I just call myself a distance runner. How will you ever know whether you're going to have the stamina to make it unless you actually run it? How will you know what's in? And here's the thing. Have you ever thought to yourself, what would happen if persecution came and someone actually put a gun to my head? Would I deny my faith? Or would I stand firm like the Salvation Army worker did just like, say, I guess it was just recently, who he was out. I don't know exactly how the circumstances happened because the article didn't say, but he was talking to his killer about his faith and telling him about the Lord Jesus Christ, and the killer said, "Enough is enough," and shot him. How do you know whether you will be loyal until you put yourself, or until God puts you, until circumstances put you in that position where you have to make a decision? Are you ready for that? People ask me all the time, will you make it under persecution? I hope so. I think so. I've just never really been in that position yet. And I'm believing that that's what's going to happen. But you know, I've heard that over the centuries, some of the people who were Christians weren't able to stand up under persecution, that they caved. You know what happened after they caved? If they were genuine Christians, they suffered extreme regret. In fact, some of the stories of the martyrs were that they went back and said, "By the way, I can't recant Christ. I guess you're going to have to kill me after all," and they did. Incredible. So I don't know. Here it was. You're faced with a decision that you have to make. You're faced with a trial, a temptation that's right in front of your life. You have to make a decision, a life-defining decision, and it's going to affect the rest of your life. That's what faith is all about. Listen to what James chapter 1, 2 through 4 says about the importance of trials. "My brothers, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." Count it all joy. Dear God, thank you that I am bankrupt. Thank you that my husband just died. Thank you that I have cancer. Hallelujah! Let's have a party, huh? Does that make any sense to you? Well, here's what I know. And this is what I preach. This is not always what I practice. When you're going through those trials, you probably can't change them. But there is one thing that you can change, and that's your attitude. And you can face those trials with joy, or you can face them with sadness. It's all up to you. Do you want to be sad or joyful? Maybe you have tears in your eyes. I'm not saying to be fake. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is there's only one thing sometimes that you can control, and that's your behavior and your attitude. And you ought to control it. Because you're going to go through that trial anyway. You might as well enjoy the ride. You might as well be thankful that God has given you that trial. Now let's get back to the moment of truth. Abraham had a knife in his hand. He raised it over his head. It was about to come down on Isaac to end his life. What was Abraham thinking at the time? What would you be thinking? I mean, think of Abraham from the first moment that God told him, you know, I want you to sacrifice your son, to the moment that he had the knife in his hands. What is Abraham thinking? I know what I'm thinking. This is crazy. I can't bring myself to do this. What is God trying to do to me? Let me tell you what Abraham was thinking. Go back to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 19. And verse 19 tells us what a man of faith thinks in the worst of times. Abraham concluded that God was able to raise Isaac up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. That's what Abraham was thinking. God promised him, Isaac is going to be the heir of all that you have. He's going to have lots of kids. Your kids are going to have lots of kids. You're going to have your descendants are going to be the sand of the sea. That's what's going through Isaac. Well, okay, if the same God that told me that Isaac is going to have lots of kids is telling me to sacrifice Isaac, then he must be able to raise him from the dead. And this is going to be an incredible miracle. Because after all, he already did one miracle. He made Sarah have a kid when she shouldn't have been able to have a kid. Abraham was doing some amazing things. Wow. Just absolutely incredible. Pass it on. Jacob had already stolen the birthright, but Esau was still going to get the blessing. So, Isaac, being on his deathbed, being just about blind, told his son Esau, what I want you to do is I want you to go out and go hunting. You guys all get that, right? Let's go hunting. Esau was a hunter, and back then you didn't have to have a permit, and he went out hunting. I want you to bring me back a savory meal, and when you bring that meal back to me, maybe my last meal, I don't know, I'm going to give you the blessing. So Esau went out on the hunt, and Rebekah heard the whole thing. She's probably standing there, I don't know. She heard the whole thing, and she said to Jacob, you're about to lose the blessing. God told me you were going to get the blessing, so here's what we're going to do. You're going to deceive your father. You're going to go out and get to the flock, and you get one of the flock, and you're going to make a savory meal, and we're going to put some fake hair on your arms because Esau's a hairy guy and you're a smooth guy, and you're going to bring this savory meal before your father, who's basically blind. He's going to eat it. He's going to bless you, and you're going to get the blessing instead of Esau. So this is the story. And so what happened was that Jacob blessed Isaac, and he, in fact, in Genesis 27:37, Isaac told Esau, indeed, I have made Jacob your master. Isn't that great? Wow. But the question I have for you is this. Here's what has puzzled me since the first time as a kid I ever heard this story. This is the question that has always puzzled me. As a kid, I heard the story of Jacob deceiving his father, and I said, why didn't his father just take the blessing back? I mean, after all, it was taken by fraud, and we all know that when you take things by fraud, legally you don't have to give them, you can take them back. Because fraud is wrong. Jacob did what was wrong. He started poorly. Why didn't he take it back? Well, I think we go to Hebrews 11, verse 20, and we read, by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. And I think the realization probably hit his father, and I'm There's no question of that. But here was a moment when his plans didn't go his way, and he realized that God had used his voice to prophetically explain the future of Jacob and Esau, and he said this, if my plans aren't your plans, God, we'll go with your plans. And he said that even in the middle of deception, even in the middle of being cheated, defrauded. And he still said, your will be done. God, you're sovereign. You're in control. I thought I was in control. I was wrong. Are you at that point in your life where things are not going your way, they go another way, and are you willing to say to God, your will be done? A life-defining moment. And Romans has an interesting explanation. Romans chapter 9, 10 through 12 says, and not only this, but when Rebekah had conceived, for the children not yet being born, not having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him who calls, for it was said to her, the oldest shall serve the youngest. Isaac should have known better, huh? didn't turn out exactly as he planned, deep down inside, he knew it was God's plan. A moment of truth. Let's turn to a third moment of truth. Back in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 21. Jacob, the man who finished well, we already told you how Jacob started poorly, right? He stole the birthright from his brother Esau. His brother came in one day and said, "Boy, I'm hungry," and Jacob was making something. Esau hadn't done too well at hunting, I guess, and Esau wanted something to eat. He wanted some porridge that Jacob was making, and Jacob said, "I'll tell you what, I'll trade you the porridge for the birthright." And Esau said, "I don't care." Traded away. And so he got the birthright, and then later on he stole the blessing from him. He didn't really start out too well. But in verse 21 it says, "By faith Jacob blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and worshipped while leaning on the top of his staff." He's dying. He's at the end of his life. Maybe he didn't start well, but he finished well. Two ways: in giving a blessing, which kind of has a little twist to it, and we'll look at that in a second, and he worshiped just before he died. The question for you is, are you going to finish well? Finishing well is that life-defining moment. Now, the story is found in Genesis 48. You can turn there if you like. Genesis 48, keeping a finger in Hebrews 11. And Ephraim and Manasseh are Joseph's two sons. You know, Joseph has become second in command in Egypt, and Joseph hears that his father is sick and dying, and he brings his two sons to Joseph to have him blessed. And in a twist, Jacob did something that his father had done inadvertently. He did it purposely. He switched hands. He put his right hand on the youngest son's head and his left hand on the oldest son's head, and he gave the best blessing to the oldest and the second blessing to the I got it backwards. It's confusing. You know, I got two choices, and it's hard to really get both of them right. But anyway, that's what he did. He did, in a twist, he did the same thing that his father had done. But he also did something very interesting in that, according to Genesis 28, he didn't just bless them, he adopted them as his own sons on his deathbed. He said, "They shall no longer be your sons, but my sons." Incredible. And so here's what happened due to that blessing. Jacob had 12 sons. I won't name them for you because I probably will forget a few. One of those sons was Joseph. Now there are 12 tribes of Israel, right? 10, 12. But Joseph had two sons. Jacob adopted those two sons as his own. Now that makes 13 sons. 14 sons. 14 sons. But here's what happened. Joseph never got a single inheritance, so that makes 13. But Ephraim and Manasseh, they both got an inheritance. Now there's 13. Did you know there's 13 tribes of Israel? Ephraim and Manasseh are really Joseph. They're really one, but they're two. So here's how this happened. When God chose the tribe of Levi to be priests, he told them, "You don't get an inheritance. You get scattered throughout all the other tribes of Israel." So there were only 12 inheritances because the Levites didn't get one. Kind of an interesting parallel to that is, did you know there's 13 apostles as well? Isn't that a crazy coincidence? And Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, is the 13th. We get one, they get 12. It's interesting. It's just a little interesting twist. But back to Jacob. He started poorly. He ended well. He wasn't the greatest father. He showed favoritism to Joseph. He'd done some crazy things, but again, let me just say this. I don't know what's going on in your life right now. Some people come to church, and every time they hear the message preached, they're filled with either guilt over what they've done, or they block it out because they don't want to hear it, because they're not living right. There is never a bad time to change that. It's never too late to have a life-defining moment and say, I want to end well. Let that ending start now. That's the story of Jacob. We have one more, Joseph. Joseph, the man with a divine purpose. Verse 22 of Hebrews chapter 11, by faith Joseph, when he was dying, again, he's at the end of his life, just like his father, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel and gave instructions concerning his bones. Now again, I ask you the question, why is this a life-defining moment for Joseph? Because, I mean, Joseph had some big life-defining moments. You remember he had some dreams about his brothers and mother and father that got him into a lot of trouble, and that was a life-defining moment. It was a moment of truth. And then there was the time that he went out to the flocks and where his brothers were, and they saw him coming, and they said, oh, here comes the dreamer. Let's kill him. And they threw him into a pit. Reuben stopped them from killing him. And then in another life-defining moment, they sold him into slavery. Hey, this sounds good. How many of you would like to sell your brother or sister into slavery? After you killed him, or before? I'm not sure which. And he was sold to slavery down to Potiphar, who was like the captain of the guard or something like that. And Potiphar's wife looked at Joseph and she said, ooh, baby, this is a good-looking Hebrew, and I got to have this guy. And Joseph said, no way, Jose. Probably not in those words exactly, but, and that was a life-defining moment because she said, oh, this Hebrew you brought in here, he tried to rape me, and he got thrown into prison. It just goes from bad to worse. And he's languishing there in prison, and he doesn't know that God all along is moving him to this incredible, you may be down and out and in prison and say, man, I just keep getting beat up and beat up and beat up. When is it going to stop? And there you're in prison, and the chief butcher and baker come in, and they have these dreams, and Joseph interprets them, and eventually that somehow makes Joseph become second in command in all Egypt, because dreams were really important back then. Huge. And he's second in command to Pharaoh. And in being second in command to Pharaoh, these are huge life-defining moments, wouldn't you say? And we get this one here. Another life-defining moment was when Jacob died. And his son, the brothers came to him and said, hey, Dad's dead, you know. Sorry for throwing you in the pit and thinking about killing you and selling you into slavery, and sorry for all the things that happened, you know, sorry. And Joseph broke down and cried, and he said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And that was a life-defining moment. But well, look at the one that's chosen here. In the scriptures, this is the one that's chosen. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of children of Israel and gave instructions for his bones. How is that a life-defining moment? I'm dying. I want my bones taken to Israel. It's prophetic is what it is. Here's a guy who had everything. He had it all. He was in the palace, second in command to Pharaoh, living in style, doing well, and he never forgot where he came from. Never forgot that he was one of those Hebrews. And he said, this is not our destiny. It's not our destiny to be rich in Egypt, to be prosperous in Egypt. It's our destiny to go back to the promised land. And by the way, take my bones there when you go. Never forgot where he came from. Genesis chapter 50, verses 24 and 25. Here's the story. Joseph said to his brothers, I'm dying, but God will surely vittered your life to Jesus and said, Jesus, I want to trust you. I believe in you. You do that today. Right now, as we close in a word of prayer, you say, I'm going to follow you, Jesus. Everyone say, I'm going to follow Jesus. Let's do that now. Father, this is our life-defining moment. I pray that we will not put it off. I pray that we will right now say, not my will, but yours be done. Whatever sacrifice you ask of me, Lord, that I'll make. I want to be a person of destiny. To start poorly maybe, but to finish well. That's what I want for my life. In Jesus' name.